for truth.
Welcome to Duality Check, the podcast where two brothers embark on a journey through the realms of scientific inquiry, the mysteries of the past, and the uncharted frontiers of spirituality. Join us as we explore the wonders of our world and beyond, all while embracing the roles of curious bystanders rather than experts. Together we'll unravel the tapestry of existence, blending the dichotomies of knowledge and wonder. Get ready to question, ponder, and delve into the dualities that shape our understanding of reality on Duality Check. I'm Drew.
And I'm Dean. Adjust your mic there.
Yeah, I just realized at the end there. Everything sounds muffled to me because I've got what might be a sinus infection. So it's like double. I'm like double headphoned right now.
You said you feel like
pressure in my ears.
Right.
Anyway, you're feeling mostly better.
I'm feeling mostly better. Just a little congested, but tried to blow it all out before we started here, and feel a lot more clear. So that's good. So
episode 54.
54. We've got a few things here. Oh, I think I opened the wrong Bashar clip. Yep, there we go. I've got the stuff I kind of teased last week that we sort of ended early, but this episode with Karl Nell and Diana Pasulka on Jesse Michels YouTube. And I want to discuss
hear some more about that.
Some of that because those two are fascinating.
Especially together, huh?
Right. Anyway, let's, I guess we got a couple comments, huh?
Yeah, we got one on Rumble, which we skipped a couple of weeks, but it's a few weeks back now.
This is a comment on our episode 51, which was about ancient apocalypse, the rock art, DNA, Rapa Nui. Comment says it's from Fresnocal on
Fresno Kyle.
Fresno. Oh, makes way more sense. Our history is a total lie. We go back many more years than we were told. For instance, Kostenki 14, the oldest European skeleton discovered in Russia. He's 37,000 years old, and surprisingly, he has the same three genetic components as modern Europeans. Just the name Kostenki 14 will lead you to the peer-reviewed study, which I did search, and I found an interesting article on that. We can read a couple snippets. He said, another amazing reference to study is the ancient megaliths, or to study the ancient megaliths is Karl Monk's The Code. He has found a mathematical code that is so sophisticated but yet so simple and to the point. What's absolutely amazing is the code is built in ways to verify any equation you find. There are multiple ways to verify each equation, so you would instantly recognize if someone altered the code. The code is worldwide, connected to all ancient megaliths. It leaves no doubt as well. The math is math. The math is the math. Oh, yeah. Another way to verify naturally occurring cyclical catastrophe. Besides the precession of the equinox that all megaliths tracked, with these names and dates, you can find a lot of the scientific evidence. They are roughly every 12,000 years apart. Here's three names, but we got evidence going back further. 36,000 years ago, Mono Lake excursion. 24,000 years ago, Lake Mungo. 12,000 years ago, Gothenburg. Just FYI, this cycle would explain our government's behavior. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and I responded just as far as what that end, the way he ended it too, like the way the government's behaving. Mm-hmm. It kind of makes sense. Like if they were somewhat aware of this cycle and what kind of catastrophe it could bring.
Right.
And they just keep everybody quiet or keep everybody in the ignorance about it or whatever.
What's Gothenburg?
Yeah, I haven't heard of that one.
Years ago.
Lake Mungo.
I've heard of the, obviously the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis was about 12,000 years ago. Gothenburg. The Gothenburg magnetic excursion. It's a article here, ResearchGate. Abstract says the Gothenburg magnetic excursion is in a broad sense ranges from 13,750 to 12,350 years before present and ends with the Gothenburg magnetic flip at 12,000 to 12,350 years ago before present. Says equals the Fjardas stadial in southern Scandinavia with a equatorial VGP position in the Central Pacific.
So it's basically saying that the poles flipped, magnetic poles
Yeah.
moved or flipped.
Yeah, there's a lot of magnetic. I mean, that's a common thing that the magnetic pole does, is it does flip quite often.
Yeah, and it moves too.
And it drifts. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I believe it's drifting at a pretty fast rate, like record rate right now.
Yeah. It's just what kind of effects does that have, and does it have some sort of effect on this cyclical nature of catastrophes?
Yeah, the Gothenburg magnetic flip represents the shortest excursion and the most rapid polar change known at present. It is also hitherto the far best dated paleomagnetic event. Huh.
Well, yeah, we appreciate that comment because give us some more research to do and things to look up.
Yeah, this sounds kind of. There's a
14.
I don't want to call him a researcher because he's not a scientist, but he reads tons of papers and publishes it on YouTube and social media. His name's Suspicious Observer.
Yeah, I think I've seen it.
He's big on the magnetic pole reversals. And the thing is, it's just so obviously our magnetic field is hugely important in protecting us from solar wind.
Yeah.
But the question is what would the actual effect be on the planet during or in the moments after a pole reversal? And is there implications for the way effects on life living in a reverse pole?
Yeah.
Does the polarity of the magnetic field have some sort of effect on biology?
In any way, yeah.
I mean, I feel pretty much all birds navigate using magnetic, they do their migrations using magnetic sensitivity, they have magnetic senses. So it might cause them to have to remap their migration patterns. But if it flips every 12,000 years, the birds have been around a lot longer than that. So they obviously have ways to deal with it. But and same for a lot of life. A lot of life has survived. But if it's happening every 12,000 years, then I don't think it can be if it's every 12,000 years, this is he's citing 3 examples of 12,000 year events. If it's something that happens every 12,000 years, like clockwork going way back, even beyond 3 times, then whatever it is that's happening can't be
so catastrophic,
or else how would we have the abundance of life we have right now? Yeah. I feel
the only thing I could think of is it would be a slow change, because they're saying this one specifically is the most rapid. So maybe how quickly these changes happen could make for more effects.
I imagine in the moment that the pole is actually flipping, there might be a time when there is essentially no magnetic field while it's reversing, and therefore no real protection. So I wonder, what kinds of effects could it trigger? The increased solar radiation, could it trigger biological effects bursts of evolutionary activity, for instance, do have some sort of effect on biology, causing If it's
Yeah,
something
like
that
if the
happens so
radiation-
regularly, like you would think
Yeah.
biology has some sort of adaptation or some sort of response to it.
That's a
But
good point. Yeah, I mean, if our magnetic protection is down for a short time, and we get bursts of like solar radiation that like washes over and maybe doesn't kill everything, but can maybe lend a hand in some sort of genetic like alterations, like could break down the genes in certain animals that during their own, normal process, just maybe genetically vary even wider during that period of time.
Right,
and then
right.
there's more of a chance of something more drastic happening. That will be interesting to look for.
and then I found this paper that he was talking about with the
Stinky.
14.
And what is this talking? This is the person they found 37,000 years ago.
Yeah, this is a number of like archaeological finds. And I believe it's one of the oldest examples of a burial I saw in here. Yeah, see here. And yeah, as he said, it apparently dates back to like 36,000 years ago.
And has the
genetic
markers
for Europeans, which is interesting because that at least sort of rewrites the out of Africa timeline.
Yeah, when were they supposed to have migrated out of Africa?
I think that's supposed to be basically around the end of the Ice Age when that happened.
Oh, really? That was supposed to be the beginning of the...
By the like modern...
Right, I guess that would make sense because if the ice caps are so far down and there's less habitable areas north, then yeah.
Anyway,
Okay.
interesting stuff.
Yeah, we'll have to look into more of this,
Interesting
and
stuff.
I'm sure we'll talk about it more. Thank you, Fresno Kyle. Or Fresno Keel, as
And
Dean
then
said.
I've got a email that's not really an email. This is clearly an AI email. I just thought it was hilarious.
Maybe it was a real email, but they didn't know what to say, so they got AI to write us an email.
Yeah, so it's from an email called Moose Canoe.
Legit.
It says, "What's up, DC bros?" This is where it gets so funny, though. "The more I look into the power of dreams as a driving psychological motivator through the Jungian analytical perspective, the more I realize grilled stuffed burrito with steak from Taco Bell."
Oh my gosh.
I'll confess that I haven't read the entire article yet, but I will. Please see the image of the gangster funeral on page 6 of the attached
The
PDF.
gangster funeral.
Most of the answers to your questions will be revealed under squelching detail collection through magnifying glass on this picture.
What if it's a code?
Though published 50 years ago, the resource could illuminate a path down an undiscovered rabbit hole. And how does one catch that special rabbit? Unique up on it. Duh. Piece into crease.
What in the world?
Signed Moose.
That's gotta be a code, right?
Yeah. So
Oh my gosh.
the more I realize grilled stuffed burrito with steak from Taco Bell sometimes, man.
Yeah, the more I realize. That is the one thing I missed from Taco Bell was the grilled stuffed burritos.
Yeah, they messed up taking that away. All right. Cool. So
That's so funny.
you've got a weekly Bashar for us.
Yeah.
Let's check this out.
Yes, we have animals, and yes, we have animal companions. But this is something that they simply choose to do. They simply choose to be with us. In much the same way that your cats choose to be with you. Because cats on your planet are not really domesticated in the same way that you have domesticated dogs. Cats choose to be with you, and yet they actually remain wild in many cases. Whereas dogs have been domesticated beyond their natural state on your planet. On our world and on many worlds, it's not about the idea of having pets, and again, we rarely have buildings in which to house them. But in nature, many animals will come up to us and will engage with us in a variety of ways, and we with them. There are a few other civilizations that do have pets closer to the way that you have them on Earth, but again, in most cases, it is not the way that you actually have pets.
That makes me think of the Rick and Morty episode.
Which one?
It was like in the first season. This is like one of the first few episodes where Rick and Morty go off somewhere, and Rick is, or Jerry is like complaining because the dog keeps peeing in the house. And he asks Rick to like come up with a solution for it, and Rick's like, ugh. So he like whips together his little helmet and puts it on the dog, and it makes the dog smart, and he like goes and uses the bathroom and stuff. And then eventually the dog like finds that there's only one battery out of 4 powering his helmet, and so he grabs some batteries and puts it in there, and then he becomes super smart, and the dogs take over the world.
That is an early one, huh?
Yeah, and then they start like rubbing Jerry's nose and like the pee stains on the carpet and telling him they're going to take his balls and stuff.
Oh, freaking Jerry.
He like confronts them and he's like, "Where are my balls, Summer?"
Damn. Rick and Morty's so good.
But no, that's funny. Yeah.
I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
I like to get all the little context from his civilizations.
I feel like cats, his point about cats is interesting too. Yeah, because if you have a cat that, is an indoor-outdoor cat, it is absolutely 100% they're choosing to come back to you.
Yeah.
And
some don't. Some don't come back.
Right, and they're wild when they're out there. They're hunting. They're walking their territory.
Yeah, they're sleeping around.
Yeah, dogs they're a different matter. They just love us unconditionally.
Yeah, I want to be as close as possible.
Life without us.
Yeah.
I was just. Do you ever watch that YouTube channel TierZoo? You ever seen that?
I don't think I have. No.
Oh, dude, they just did an episode on wolves.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The concept of this channel is that
they just rate stuff.
Well, they just like talk about zoology and talk about animals, and like it's a kind of an education channel. But the premise is like it's like a gamer talking about a game, and they're using gaming lingo.
Okay.
And so they're talking about like on like the Africa server or the North America server.
Okay.
And they talk about like balance patches, like after like extinction events or like balance patches. And they talk about like builds that are broken and stuff. And it's hilarious. But yeah, they talk about how wolves become dogs. Here, I'll give us a couple minutes of this.
Owned and operated by a bunch of player in the game. The short-faced bear was seemingly invincible, being the largest carnivorous mammal build of all time, and the cave hyena had an absurdly powerful bite force, able to crack bones and tear incredible amounts of flesh with every bite. Yet, of the Ice Age's top predators, the one which proved to be the most resilient and indeed the most successful was the wolf. Even though wolves are nowhere near as massive or as powerful as these other Ice Age monsters, today the wolf build is practically synonymous with ferocity and hunting prowess. But what is it about wolves that made them such a force of nature? Today we'll find out.
How wolves broke
wolves
the
are
game.
part of the carnivoran archetype, which became popular during the Miocene update. The main perk of this archetype is something called carnassial teeth, a trait which greatly improves the ability of carnivorous builds to consume food. Rather than needing to swallow things whole, or mercilessly slam-dunking the daylights out of things until they fall apart, carnassial teeth enable the player to bite off small chunks of meat, which might seem like a small thing, but really it opens up tons of new opportunities for carnivorous playstyles, including for scavenging carcasses and for sharing larger kills among teammates. The carnivoran archetype is split into 2 main factions, feliforms and caniforms. There are a ton of differences between these two, but I'll try and simplify them into how the differences play out in practice. At their core, feliforms are adapted to being hyper-carnivorous ambush predators, whereas caniforms are more generalist in nature. This is most obvious in their snouts, which have different shapes and lengths. Caniforms tend to have longer, less compact snouts. This enables them to carry a wide range of different types of teeth, suited for a more omnivorous playstyle. You have some teeth for dealing damage, some for shearing meat, some for crunching bones or nuts, and even some for chewing on plant fibers. Meanwhile, feliforms have shorter snouts, enabling them to have a higher bite force, but limiting them to pretty much only having teeth meant for either dealing damage or shearing off chunks of meat. The longer caniform snout gives them other advantages too. The larger nasal cavity
They had like the
enables
Breath
them
of
to
the Wild
breathe
stamina
easily
meter.
and take more oxygen. This gives caniform builds much greater
That's
stamina,
so funny.
enabling them to run for much greater distances without tiring. It also facilitates their vastly superior sense of smell, which enables them to track prey, scavenge for food, and find teammates. So it makes sense why just about every feliform build is an ambush predator, whereas caniforms can be anything from acrobatic marine builds to slow tanky herbivores. Focusing more specifically on wolves though, pretty much everything I've said so far about the caniform build applies here. But for a more in-depth analysis, let's take a look at the wolf's base stats. So, as ferocious as wolves are thought to be, their power stat is fairly mid for an apex predator. Wolves aren't really going to be one-shotting anything larger than a rabbit with their bite attacks. And due to the non-retractability of their claws, they aren't going to be doing much damage with their paw swipe either. And yet, taking out players above their own weight class is a signature aspect of the wolf's strategy. This is typically done by chaining strings of bite attacks together in order to inflict the bloodlust status condition, which drains the target's health and stamina over time. When executed properly by a pack of wolves, this can bring down basically anything, no matter how large the target. But obviously, since this is not a quick process, there's a lot of room for mistakes, so let's see how wolves handle taking damage rather than dealing it. So due to their lower
skip
defense
forward
stat,
when he
wolves are
starts
getting-
talking about,
and
like, the
as their
social
teammates get
stuff.
further and further away, most players will eventually try and make a break for it. And this is where the wolf pack will start dealing damage. By taking turns attacking their back end repeatedly, they'll eventually inflict the bloodlust status effect, which slowly drains the target's HP, leading to a guaranteed game over, at which point the entire pack splits the loot. This is overpowered in and of itself, but where it really gets broken is when you re-examine the same tactic through the wolf-human team combo. Because all of the things that make the wolf's pack hunting work actually function even more effectively when paired with a human. Humans and wolves are similar in that both are exceptional distance runners, allowing them to naturally keep pace with each other and avoid slowing each other down. But in addition to having similar perks, they also cover each other's weaknesses and fill in the biggest gaps in each other's hunting strategy. Humans lack the same perception stat that wolves have. While they can use their intelligence to sort of supplement their weak sense of hearing and smell, there's really no substitute to just having a teammate who can lock onto a scent at a great distance and never lose it. But why do wolves need humans? You may remember, when wolves hunt, they can oftentimes reach an impasse due to their lack of ability to quickly deal lethal damage. Humans do not have this limitation, and can easily break this stalemate using one of their projectile weapons. The same is true on defense. The wolf's sensory abilities can detect the approach of a dangerous enemy, and alert the humans of the impending threat, a threat that wolves alone would struggle to drive away. And so domestic wolf and human hunter-gatherer players naturally made for an unstoppable force that lasted through multiple balance patches, including the end of the Ice Age and the beginning of the Anthropocene. Eventually, after spending so much time cooperating, many wolf players began speccing their characters specifically to better synergize with humans, such as a passive mental health regen aura, and higher intelligence and better communication abilities, which allowed them to handle more complicated commands, eventually renaming their build entirely from wolf to dog. And because of their optimization towards collaboration, even as humans transitioned away from their hunter-gatherer playstyle, dogs still remained a relevant and high-tier choice for their party comp. This isn't to say that the wolf's only good interspecies combo is with a human, though. Among the player base who remained wild, one solid combo is with the raven or crow. They will often seek out a wolf player and lead them to a carcass they'd found far away. These POIs are usually hotly contested, and too competitive for a crow to capture by themselves. So, in exchange for leading the wolf there, the wolf will chase away the other players and share the remaining spoils with the bird. But anyway...
I didn't know that was a thing. That's so cool.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, this is hilarious, dude. I love these videos. There's
gonna
like
be
an
watching
entire series, and he's been putting them out for years, and every
That's
one of
awesome.
them, they're just great.
That's
Just
awesome.
using gamer language to learn about animals is hilarious.
It is great.
And people usually have great, this comment is hilarious. Sadly, the wolf build has weakness to belly rub and treats when facing human players. This opens them up to the good boy finisher, forcing a transformation into domesticated dog archetype.
So good.
Gotta love the internet. All right, so cool. But yeah, that's an interesting idea of like aliens and different pets and how that might work.
How that might work, yeah.
Like imagine if you're like a a sort of like how Bashar says, like they essentially all communicate telepathically. So like having that ability with and being able to use it with animals could really open up the way
I'm like episode 4 on telepathy tapes now.
Oh, nice.
And I was just having the thought about like it with animals and like how animals have. Who was it that they brought on? Rupert Sheldrake. Mm-hmm. And his study on like animal telepathy and stuff, and human telepathy too a bit. But
yeah, he talks about the experiments they did with dogs and how they're able to tell that their owners are coming home.
Yeah, they set up a camera watching the dog, and then they have a camera following the person. And like when they say they're going to be home, or like when they make the intention of like I'm going home, is when the dog starts to sense that they will be home soon. Right, and
he said they did a bunch of controls, like having the owners drive in different cars so that like it's not engine noise.
And some owners like having to like all of a sudden getting a call and not coming home.
Right, and that the dog will sit there waiting at the door until the human turns around and they're not coming home anymore, and then all of a sudden the dog will like walk away from the door and lose interest.
Yeah, it's so fascinating.
Yeah,
and then to couple onto that, like the talks. Just the whole subject of the telepathy tapes is very fascinating, and I really want to see a documentary with all this footage live.
They're working on one.
Yeah, I really want to see that because I think that would do really well. Mm-hmm. And I want to see all that. I think you paid for that, right? You have access to all those.
Yeah, I've got the videos.
Yeah, I want to see some of those.
I don't want to play them on the podcast just because she has them behind a paywall. But
yeah, we won't play them here. But
and for like the privacy of the children. But
of course.
Anyway,
but yeah, I'm fascinated by that subject.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I found also this interesting interview, snippet from Theories of Everything, with Michael Levin, which I've had on the list for us to do an episode on him for a while. But I wanted to share some of this, but we're actually really close to break. So why don't we do that? And then we can come back and I can show you some of that.
Sweet. Sounds good. We'll be right back.
This is Stevie Nader. It's called Take You On. This is the acoustic version though. So here you go. Enjoy.
I've been caught in a storm before. You turned and said to me I was out past the shore, sailing towards a dream, and I promised myself that I never sail one step off my coast. Among the things to say, among the things to say, yeah, among the things to say, among the things to say. Say I would take you on, I take you on, I take you on. Say I would take you on, take you on, I take you on. Once I was lost in the woods, you slowly start to say, rain beat down where I stood, as I tried to find my way, and I swore to myself that I never sail one step off my path. Among the things to say, among the things to say, yeah, among the things to say, among the things to say. So I would take you on, I take you on, I take you on. So I would take you on, take you on, I take you on. So I would take you on, I take you on, I take you on. So I would take you on, take you on, take you on. You know I was on the shore and standing at the wooden exit door, 'cause it was you that I was waiting for. Yeah, that was me standing on the shore and knocking at the wooden exit door, 'cause it was you that I was waiting for. But I would take you on, I 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 take you on. I take you on, I take you on, I take you on.
Welcome back. All right, so yeah, I was talking about this video with the theories of everything, Kurt J. Mungle, which if you haven't checked that podcast, it is sick.
Yeah, I haven't listened to him in a while, but I always love his stuff.
It's on the spectrum. It definitely falls on the extra nerdy side. What's cool about it is Kurt he tries to get the most he can out of his interview subjects, who are usually like highly academic, by not talking down in the language. So a lot of times they'll be throwing like very high level concepts and vocabulary out there, and they won't necessarily pause to explain everything.
Right.
And
so he doesn't make them either is kind of the point.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And he doesn't kind of force it to be more, generic for everybody.
Every once in a while he'll like throw out videos where
or he interjects
like,
a lot too, with like his own like outside of the interview. He'll like pop in and be like,
sometimes he'll throw in like nice little edited bits to like fill in details, but on the podcast format it's not so much.
Right.
But anyway, this is a cool one with Dr. Michael Levin, who we are going to do an episode on because his research is incredible. He's this like incredible biologist who's discovered that how cells essentially communicate through like electric fields. And he's got his research is going to change the world. So we'll be doing a video, like our whole podcast on that. And in this, they only kind of like skim over little bits of that, but this is more about, he ends up talking a lot about, like what it means to be a self, like what is a self.
Yeah.
And so, let's
speculates on that.
Yeah, let's check this out. It's a little more philosophical.
In philosophy, there's this concept of universals. So Plato had the forms, and then would say that this is almost rectangular, so it's embodying the rectangularness, which is somewhere out there, akin to what I imagine you meant when you said intelligence is there being embodied by this. But then there's Aristotle, which says, okay, yes, there is something akin to a form, it's just not out there. It's actually in here. The rectangularness is a property of this microphone. So I imagine this latter view is the one that most biologists would take. Not that there's intelligence out there, let's just grab it and instantiate it here. No, something has the property of intelligence. So explain what you mean when you say embodying intelligence, and also what you mean by intelligence.
Yeah. let's see, and just a quick thing to finish real quick the previous thought, which is that the reason I think this stuff is not these are not questions of philosophy. These are very practical questions of science because they lead to specific actionable technology. So the idea that what's going on in cancer is a shrinking of the cognitive light cone leads directly to a research program where you say, well, instead of killing these cells with toxic chemotherapies, because I believe that they're genetically irrevocably damaged, maybe what we can do is force them into better electrical networks with their neighbors, and that's exactly what we've done. And so we've had lots of success expressing strong human oncogenes in frog embryo cells, and then leaving the oncoproteins be, but instead making sure that they're connected into tight electrical networks with their neighbors, and they normalize. They make nice skin, nice muscle. They do their normal thing instead of being metastatic. And
so this is the part where he's sort of reviewing on his own work. So this is like his research talking about the electrical networks that cells form. And in his other work, he talks about how essentially cancer could be described as cells shutting down and not working within the larger electrical network that they're embedded in, and instead starting to work solo and starting to like work in a smaller group, and they're not working with the goal of the rest of the organism.
It's working against everything else in a sense.
Right. And so he's saying he's developed this approach where you can essentially force these cells without actually trying to remove these cancerous cells. You can actually force them to start working in the electrical network again, and that they will essentially become non-cancerous again. And they've done this in frogs.
Wow.
This is crazy, crazy stuff.
And so that kind of thing, it's very important to me that all these ideas, and so we'll talk about in a minute about Platonic space and things like that. It's important to me that all of these ideas don't just remain as kind of philosophical musings, but they have to make contact with the real world, and specifically not just explaining stuff that was done before, but facilitating new advances. They have to enable new research programs that weren't possible before. That's what I think is the value of all of this kind of these deep philosophical discussions. So let's see, with respect to the definition of intelligence. So I like, for practical purposes, I like William James's definition, which is some degree of the ability to reach the same goal by different means. And that presupposes, it's an interesting definition because it presupposes that there is some problem space that the agent is working on, but it does not say you have to be a brain. It doesn't say you have to be natural versus artificial. It doesn't say any of that. It's a very cybernetic definition. What it says is that you have some amount of skill in navigating that problem space to get to where you want to go, despite interventions, despite surprise, despite various barriers in your way. How much competency do you have to achieve that? And that was his definition of intelligence. Now, I will certainly agree that that doesn't capture everything that we care about in cognition. So a focus on problem solving doesn't handle play, and it doesn't handle emotions and things like that. But for the purposes of our work, I focus on the problem solving aspects of intelligence. So within that, your point about the Platonic space. So now to be clear, everything that I was saying before, I think we have very strong empirical evidence for. And so now I'm going to, in answering this question, I'm just going to talk about stuff that I'm not sure of yet, and that these are ideas we don't, I don't feel strongly that we've shown that any of this is true. But this is my opinion, and this is where our research is going now.
AKA, let me speculate for a bit.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting definition of intelligence. You know what it makes me think of? Do you remember our economics episode and kind of walking you guys through like what Austrian economics is and how it's about humans act because they see essentially a future in which they anticipate some sort of discomfort, and so they use like knowledge of the world and knowledge of like what may happen if they act this way or that way in order to determine what act they're going to take in order to change their future.
To counter whatever's to come or whatever,
It just seems like a very compatible, that definition seems very compatible with that sort of like Austrian economics mentality of human action. And what's great about it is it's not necessarily specific to even humans. It's more
sounds like it's just
general to intelligence
in general. Yeah.
I actually think that the Platonic view is more correct, and I know this is not how most biologists think about things. I think that in the exact same way that mathematicians that are sympathetic to the Platonic worldview, this idea that there are, in fact, in some way, there is a separate world in which various rules of number theory and various facts of mathematics and various properties of computation and things like that, right? That there's a separate space where these things live. And importantly, the idea is that, they think that we discover those things. We don't invent them or create them. We discover them, that and that they would be true still if all the facts of the physical universe were different. They would still, be true, right? I extend that idea in a couple of ways. One is, I think that what exists in that Platonic space is not just rules of mathematics and things like that, which are in a certain sense low agency kind of objects because they just sort of sit there doing, they don't do much. I actually think that there's a spectrum of that, and some of the components of that Platonic space have much higher agency. I think it's a space of minds as well, and of different ways to be intelligent. And I think that just like when you make certain devices, you suddenly harness the rules of computation, rules of mathematics that are basically free lunches. There are so many things you can build that will suddenly have properties that you didn't have to bake in. You get that for free, basically, right? I think intelligence is like that. I think some of the components of that Platonic space are actually minds, and sometimes what happens when you build a particular kind of body, whether it's one that's familiar to us with a brain and so on, or really some very unfamiliar architectures, whether they be alien or synthetic or whatever. I think what you're doing is you're harnessing a pre-existing intelligence that is there in the same way that you harness various laws of mathematics and computation when you build specific devices.
So that's kind of the idea of like the antenna. Like we are the antenna that picks up the consciousness in a field of minds.
Yeah,
the way he puts it.
So yes and no.
Well, he's talking about a spectrum of intelligences, whether it be natural to human or artificial or alien, picking up on the same intelligence that's basically intertwined with the physical matter around it.
So like when Pythagoras came up with the Pythagorean theorem, according to this theory, it's not that he invented it. It's not that, the unique mind of Pythagoras created something in the world that couldn't have been created otherwise. It's that he somehow made a discovery. The same way that, if you sail off on a ship back in the, 1400s, across the Atlantic Ocean, and you may make a discovery of a landmass that was there, regardless of whether or not you were going to take that voyage and find it. Right. But when you do, you're finding something that is already there. It already has a sort of existence of its own. Right. And so he's saying that, like in a similar way, like mathematicians are sort of saying, like they feel that they are making discoveries that they aren't necessarily inventing. And so he's saying in a similar way, like formulations and configurations that can create minds, that can create intelligence. These are nature essentially like exploring and discovering formulations that sort of already exist in a manner of speaking,
or at least just allowing, like whatever framework it is it's allowing for the mass, like. Maybe there are multiple like ways something might live its life out, and it might all be like encoded in that space, but it's still encoded. Like it leaves room for anything that is going to happen in that space to happen.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think he's making like a spiritual point here.
No, probably not.
Like I don't think he's necessarily saying that you're going with like an antenna theory, although he may subscribe to that. And in fact, he is very open-minded on these topics. In some of the other interviews I've heard him talk about these things. He's just super fascinating to listen to. He's one of the most open-minded, like highly productive academic research scientists I've ever met. He's just super fascinating. But anyway, let's keep going, because this is where it's going to start shifting into talking about like what a self is and what is memory and what is the difference between like myself now and myself in the future.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Well, that's super interesting. So at any moment, there's Mike 11, but there's Mike 11 at 11 a.m. Then there's Mike 11 at 11:01 a.m. And it's not clear they're the same. So there's the river. Do you step in it? This is the same river. Okay, cool. There's a through line. There's something there, though. Maybe it's something like you're akin to what you were an epsilon amount of time previous. And then that's the through line. So as long as that's true, then you can draw a worm of you throughout time. Are you saying that at any slice of that, there was a Mike 11 in some Mike 11 space, which is also in the minds of human space, and you're picking out points somehow? You're traversing this space of minds.
That's actually even more specific than what I was saying. I mean, that's interesting, and I think that's that what I was saying, that in general kinds of minds. So there are different. I don't know quite what to think about individual instances, but kinds of minds.
Because that would be an extremely large space then.
Well, I think the space is extremely large, possibly infinite, but in fact probably infinite. But I think what I was talking about was mainly types of different minds, types of cognitive systems. Now, for individuals, you raise a really interesting point, which is I call them selflets, which are the kind of the thin slices of experience that
you call them selflets.
Selflets,
uh-huh.
Because you have a self, and then the different slices of it are the selflets, and you can look at it as kind of like that special relativity, bread loaf, sliced into pieces, that kind of thing. So I think what's interesting about asking that question about the self and what is the through line is what's really important there is to pick a vantage point of an observer. Again, kind of akin to what happens in relativity. You have to ask from whose perspective. So one of the things about being a continuous self is that other observers can count on your behaviors and your properties staying more or less constant. So the reason that we identify, oh yes, you're the same person as you were before, is basically nobody cares that you have the same atoms or you don't, or the cells have been replaced. What you really care about is that this being, I can have the same kind of relationship with them that I had before. In other words, they're consistent. I can expect the same behaviors, the things that I think they know, they still know, and so on. And so that of course, in our human lives, that often breaks down because humans grow from being children to being adults. All their preferences change. The things that they remember and the things that they value change. In our own lives, we sometimes change, right? And that's a much more important change. Are you the same person, even though if all your material components remain the same, but you changed all your beliefs, all your preferences, would you still be the same person, right? So I think what we mean when we say the same is not about the matter of it all. It's about what kind of relationship we can still have, and what do I expect from you behavior wise, and so on.
That's pretty
that's a good point.
Fascinating, huh?
That's a good way to explain that. Yeah. So like, yes, you might be a different version of the person you were minutes or hours or whatever ago, but the consistency of like your personality and all the things that are to be expected of that person, like unless those drastically change in that time, do you really change?
But over enough time, they almost inevitably do change.
Always.
And so then how do we draw that through line? Right? Like if I take a snapshot of myself 20 years ago and a snapshot of myself today, and I put those side by side, it's not obvious that they're the same person with the same through line. But if you take that snapshot like every second for 20 years and you put them all next to each other in this giant series,
you see
now you can see that sort of trend and the changes. Yeah. But like if it's not the atoms that compose us, if it's not the cells that make us up, if it's not even over long enough time, our beliefs or our preferences behaviors, or our memories even, what is it that defines
who we are?
Right.
Yeah. I think it's the, like he said, the point of view of the observer. Like I have a specific memory and an idea of who I am, and everybody else who observes me from a different perspective is going to have their own version of who I am. And it's all, these are all multiverses, because the version of me is playing out in everybody else's lives.
Yeah. Well,
But
that's
they're
really
seeing
interesting,
it
because he's kind of
from a
going to
different
go this
point of
direction,
view.
like what even is a memory?
Right.
Because, you know, in our current brains, a memory is like some sort of like
Snapshot or
biological snapshot that changes and evolves and isn't necessarily perfect.
Right.
Like my memory of what happened yesterday is not the same
as your experience
fidelity of if I was to have a 360-degree 5 cents VR real-time capture, like, and play that back of what happened yesterday. Like my memory is not that high fidelity.
Right.
And like even the further I get from it, it's going to continue to degrade.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting. Yeah. So he goes some even more really interesting places with this, and I think he gets kind of profound here.
And there's some really interesting, and so that's from the perspective of an external observer. Now, the latest work that I just published a couple of days ago looks at what does that mean from the perspective of the agent themselves, and this idea that you don't have access to your past. What you have access to are memory engrams, traces of past experience that were deposited in your brain and possibly in your body that future you is going to have to interpret. And so that leads to a kind of scenario where you treat your own memories as messages from your past self, The idea then that is that those memories have to be interpreted. You don't necessarily know what they mean right away because you're different. You're not the same as you were, right? Especially over long periods of time. And this comes out very starkly in organisms that change radically, like caterpillars to butterfly. So memories persist from caterpillar to butterfly, but the actual detailed memories of the caterpillar are of absolutely no use to the butterfly. It doesn't eat the same stuff. It doesn't move in the same way. It has a completely different body, completely different brain. You can't just take the same memories. And so I think what happens in biology is that it is very comfortable. In fact, it depends on the idea that the substrate will change. You will mutate your cells. Some cells will die. New cells will be born. Material goes in and out. Unlike in our computational devices, the material is not. You're not committed to the fidelity of information the way that we are. In our computation, you are committed to the salience of that information. So you will need to take those memory traces and reinterpret them for whatever your future situation is. In the case of the butterfly, completely different. In the case of the adult human, somewhat different than your brain when you were a child. But even during adulthood. The context, your mental context, your environment, everything changes. And I think you don't really have an allegiance to what these memories meant in the past. You reinterpret them dynamically. And so this gives a kind of view of the self, kind of a process view of the self, that what we really are is a continuous dynamic attempt at storytelling, where what you're constantly doing is interpreting your own memories in a way that makes sense about what, a coherent story about what you are, what you believe about the outside world. And it's a constant process of self-construction. So that I think is what's going on with selves.
I mean, there's been plenty of times where you could think of being where you are now and like pulling on a memory and it being some sort of catalyst to where you are now, and you always have that memory. But then sometimes that memory later on can be used for something completely different, for a different purpose. It has a different thing that it brought to your past that's going to help you for that time in your life, right?
So maybe something happens to you, someone betrays you, someone pisses you off, or something like unjust happens in your life, right? And in that exact moment, you're upset, you're angry, and then maybe for the next few months, next few years, you see that, and maybe you have like a resentment or a bitterness to it. But then maybe years later or decades later, that those same bits of memory, like you're drawing a new contextual storyline, you're giving yourself a new narration. And now when you weave in those bits, now you're all of a sudden grateful because there's some lesson you learned. There's some there's some narrative choice that you made in reconstructing those memories that allowed you to take different actions. And now you're grateful for these things that have happened in the past that at one point you were bitter about. And so that very same memory can have different context through the course of your life. And you're almost like an adaptation of constantly updating storytelling narratives about these pieces of these little messages in a bottle that you're sending to your future self.
Yeah. So at any given moment, you're just interpreting your past, your memories of the past with the color glasses of your current self. So you know, so that's an interesting way to think about it. Instead of it being like solidly like factual things that happened, it's more of the way you whatever's going on and whatever is feeding, you know, whoever you are at the moment is the questions you're asking about your past, and those are the answers you're going to get. So it's like, is anything you see really factual? But you're the only one who has the information, so it's not like you could like at least not yet, where you can get a third person view or a second hand view of the memory and have somebody else's opinion on it, right?
Well, and that's where like
where you can put it in
community and communication and stuff come in.
That's where the animus comes in.
You can you can draw on others for that sort of like service, and that's sort of what we do for each other.
It's exactly what these social relationships are in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So yeah, he expands this, and it's pretty interesting.
And that we interpret our memories as messages from our past selves to our current selves. Then can we reverse that and say that our current actions are messages to our future self?
Yeah. I think that's exactly right. I think that a lot of what we're doing now is at any given moment is behavior that is going to enable or constrain your future self. You know, you're setting the conditions in which the environment in which your future self is going to be living, including changing yourself. You know, anything you undertake as a self-improvement program, or conversely, when people entertain intrusive or depressive thoughts, that changes your brain. That literally changes the way that your future self is going to be able to process information in the future. Everything you do radiates out not only as messages and a kind of niche construction, you know, where you're changing the environment in which you're going to live and which everybody else is going to live. We are constantly doing that to ourselves and to others. And so that, really forces a kind of thinking about your future self as kind of akin to other people's future selves. And I think that also has important ethical implications, because once that symmetry becomes apparent, that your future self is not quite you, and also others' future selves are also not you, that suggests that the same reason you do things so that your future self will have a better life, you might want to apply that to others' future selves. Like breaking down this idea that, and I'm certainly not the first person to say this, but breaking down the idea that you are a persistent object, separate from everybody else, and sort of persisting through time, breaking that down into a set of selves, and what you are doing now is basically for the good of a future self, I think makes you think differently about others' future selves at the same time.
To stay informed in an ever...
Yeah, good point. Not just thinking about yourself, thinking about your family and the people around you, the people in your community, trying to invest in them Right, because a lot of people get this myopic, selfish, egotistical attitude where they only care about themselves, right? And if you can sort of take this view that like you actually aren't the same person you were a month ago, especially a year ago, especially a decade ago, and then you draw that in the opposite direction of time, you're not the person you're going to be in a week, the person you're going to be in a month, the person you're going to be in a year is definitely not the same person as you are now, but you have a relationship to them and choices that you make and changes and decisions you make will set up that person to inherit whatever choices that you're making now. And so you're essentially doing charity for this person that is not quite you to inherit in the future. And that sort of ability to do that, and if you can see it that way,
then that could change the context in which you treat others, because if the future version of you isn't exactly you, then someone else not being you shouldn't necessarily be this barrier to you interacting or positively influencing them or feeling some sort of responsibility towards, acting in a certain way.
Yeah, like, well, it kind of gives me the same feels as like just having the idea that like all consciousnesses are connected in some way or another. Mm-hmm. And like the idea that like what you have the effect on others, like you were just, mentioning, like you can now interact with those consciousness as if they are you, because it doesn't matter whether it's you or not. It's some future,
because either way it's not you.
Distinctly not you from this time at this moment. It's just having the idea that it doesn't matter who it is, whether it's for you or for somebody else, it's going to push forward the future mind.
Right.
Continuing the growth.
And there's these like sort of concentric circles that you can build out. Like it's the easiest to like identify with your future self. It's maybe a little less, but still pretty freaking easy to like do that for family. And then a little less, but still easy to do it for like close community. But like you can keep extending that out, and there's no like there's no definite, it's sort of arbitrary. Like what is the difference between, you and some person 2 states over or on the other side of the globe? It's still, in a sense, like it's all humanity and it's all consciousness and it's all future selves.
So we just figured out why Bashar does what he does.
Dang.
Because he doesn't care if we're all consciousness, and he's trying to help us on our future, on our guidance toward the future.
This is just like a highly eloquent way of taking mushrooms and being like, we're all one, man.
For sure, yeah.
But yeah, I found that
I like his take on that.
Stimulating. So
Dr. Michael Levin.
Yeah, he's cool, and I can't wait till we do our episode on him. And this kind of like is motivating me to dive deep on his stuff, so that we can do that soon. Anyway, let's take our next break here, and then we'll come back and we'll go into some Diana Pasulka, and Karl Nell talks about some UFOs. This is TJ McNulty, Nickels and Dimes.
I had a nickel for every time I lied to myself. I'd buy myself some common sense and make those cents stack into dollars. I'll bury them deep, not to be bothered, so I don't spend it again on me again. Well, no, not on me again. think it's something about your currency that doesn't sit easy with me, but I understand you have the riches of 1,000 men and always handled opportunities well, invested in stocks as others fell, always had the cash flow to keep your feet on the go. Well, you were always a capitalist of love's riches.
Welcome back.
All right.
So let's dive into some UFO stuff.
Please.
First off, I want to share this website I found. It's isaaccoy.com. This dude has some really cool stuff on this website. It's like a UFO best of. He's got a starter pack here. He's got so many links. He's got a bunch of like cases you can look through.
A bunch of photos too.
Yes, he's got a bunch of photos.
Alien photos.
Yeah, different photos of aliens and UFOs, and like whole write-ups of like where they come from, what are the contexts, and then a bunch of UFO videos too. So yeah, this is a really cool resource. I've only like scratched the surface of it, but there's some really, really cool stuff here. So anyway, just wanted to put that out there as a resource for y'all if you want to check out some weird stuff.
Isaac Coy.
Yeah. Anyway, let's hop into some Karl Nell. This is the Jesse Michels podcast. The title of this one is Biblical UFOs, Occult NASA, and End Times, featuring Karl Nell and Diana Pasulka. So here's the first snippet I saved.
Yeah, we actually looked into this area, and so we're probably privy to a lot of information that's not publicly available. So, how can the rest of the folks out there maybe have some confidence that, there's some reality to this subject? So there's sort of three lines of evidence that you can look at. There's the first principles, there's sort of testimonial from people that are in positions to know, and then there's the data. So like if we're going to kind of run through those from first principles, the going in position is probably the laws of physics are the same here that they are everywhere else. And undoubtedly there's some exceptions, but in general, that's pretty much accepted by everybody. And so if you look at how quickly life evolved on our planet, the argument that's usually made is that life is uncommon and that faster than light travel is not possible. And both of these things really have no evidence for them. It's the exact opposite. So for instance, there are blue-green algae fossilized in stromatolites from 3.5 billion years ago. And recent scholarship has indicated that life may have evolved even earlier, 4.1 billion years ago. So the Earth itself is 5 billion years old. The crust has not even cooled by 4.1 billion years ago. So there's evidence that life evolved on Earth at the earliest possible time, even earlier than would be reasonably suspected. There's microbes that can live in outer space that we've determined are viable. And recently, as of maybe a month ago, people had identified microbes that were in stasis in 2 billion year old terrestrial rock that were brought back to life. So in essence, life is either evolving very quickly or some sort of panspermia situations going on. That's what all the evidence sort of suggests. If you look at the sun's what's called a population 1 star. there's 20 billion population 1 stars in the galaxy. The sun is like a relatively young population 1 star. There's stars that are like the sun that are 5 billion years older than the sun. So that's like a massive amount of time for other civilizations to potentially evolve on these other planets, and just statistically. So then you look at like faster than light travel, like can they get here? You don't even need that assumption, but Miguel Alcubierre, a Mexican postgraduate student, University of Mexico, in 1994, solved Einstein's equations for an effective faster than light mechanism. NASA's looked into this. There's no dispute that the solution is a valid solution. So it requires this thing called negative energy to work. Well, negative energy is a component of quantum mechanics. The Casimir effect, which was known in the 60s and demonstrated in the 90s, is evidence for the existence of negative energy. The expansion of the universe, which we've recently determined is accelerating, is due to something called dark energy. Dark energy is negative energy. So we've got an effective solution for Einstein's equations that requires negative energy, and we know negative energy exists. This isn't an engineering solution, but it is a theoretical solution. So it's very much disingenuous to suggest that life is uncommon and faster than light travel is possible. Both of those are false.
So that's just the first principles thinking on the matter, right? So he says 3 lines of evidence. This is all the first line of evidence. And this is where I just couldn't agree more with the points he's making, that either we have some sort of panspermia or life is so likely to evolve that it evolved at the very absolute first instance it could evolve here on this planet. And either of those things, regardless of which one you subscribe to, sort of hint at a plethora of life across the universe, that if you give it
and across time too,
right? So if you give life even remotely close to the conditions it needs to get going, it will get going.
Yeah.
Based
how
on
far it gets and whether it needs to go into go dormant for millennia or whatever.
Right. So it would be totally different if the Earth being, I thought it was about 4.5 billion years old, but he's saying 5. So let's say 5 billion years. If we didn't see life until 1 billion years ago, and for 4 billion years there was absolutely zero life on this planet, it would be a whole different argument, right?
Yeah.
It would show that something has to happen to give the correct conditions for life to finally get started.
Yeah, but if that's not the case, and it can get started, but
it can get started while the crust hasn't even cooled yet on the planet.
Right.
And that's what we have evidence of now. So we're talking conditions that are so unconducive, unhospitable to life as we know it, that we would never expect life to exist while the crust hasn't cooled yet. Now we have evidence that is in fact the case. So either panspermia, life is just constantly raining down, which means just life is out there.
Yeah, it's got to be.
Or it's so inevitable and easy may not be the right word, but inevitable, I think, is probably the right word, that life will evolve, that the minute you give life the even close to the remote conditions it needs, it just evolves. And so either one of those means our galaxy has to be teeming with life.
Yeah. It's just how much time does any of this life get to evolve before it gets reset, you know? Yeah, I mean, that would be the ultimate question. Even if we, life started, 4-something billion years ago, how far did it get before it needed to do it again, or was set back long enough to where nothing happened for millennia and millennia and millennia? But it's still, either way, the idea of, where does life come from?
Yeah. So, life, according to our best evidence now, life has to essentially be everywhere. And if you look at Chandra Vikramasinga, who we've covered on the podcast a couple times, his panspermia ideas, he shows multiple lines of evidence that life, in fact, there in fact is evidence of life outside of this planet, like the film that grows on the outside of the space station, or the mass spectrometry we look at in comet tails, or in nebula clouds, shows the spectrogram that is consistent with biological life.
Yeah.
Or at least the building blocks of such. So
yeah, so if it can survive in the vacuum of space and with the bare essentials of what we believe is life bringing,
then it's way more hardy than we gave it credit for. And then the other aspect being the faster than light travel. And right, all you need is this one example about the Alcubierre drive, which has, is a proven solution to Einstein's field equations.
With the negative energy, yeah.
It requires negative energy, but he's saying, the Casimir effect, which I don't know if you know about what the Casimir effect is.
Not entirely, no.
So the idea is that you take two plates and you put them so close together but not touching that, like, in quantum phenomena, there is this idea of a like quantum foam, which is that these particles come into existence and then annihilate, particle antiparticle pairs. They pop into existence, but if they touch each other, they annihilate each other. And so they're constantly being created and destroyed.
Because
this is like they call it the quantum foam, or some people say like maybe like 0 point energy or whatever. Like if you zoom in on the most empty vacuum of space,
you see all of this.
You see all of this energetic activity of all of this quantum activity where things are popping in and out of existence, right?
A lot of motion, yeah. A lot of energy.
So if you take these two plates and you put them so incredibly close together that they're not touching, but they're so close together that there is no longer space for these particle-antiparticle pairs to annihilate. So then you end up with like an imbalance where they pop into existence, but they can't reach each other again to annihilate. And so you end up with this weird like vacuum effect where the pressure on the outside of the plates from these things creating and annihilating versus the pressure on the inside where they don't have space to be created and annihilated.
Which is always pushing out.
And that ends up with this pressure that pushes these plates together. And that's called the Casimir effect. And he says it's evidence for negative energy. I don't know like the logic for why that's negative energy. But anyway, and then he says dark matter is evidence of negative energy, which again, I don't know the logic on that, but either way,
it's interesting.
It's interesting. So if faster than light travel is in fact possible and life is so common, then essentially like this extraterrestrial life has to exist, and it only makes sense that they're here.
Yeah.
But that's only line one of his evidence.
That's just first principles.
Right.
So that's sort of the first principles argument once you kind of put that into the context of all the other evidence. So let's look at testimonial. Now, testimonial isn't hard scientific factual data, but then you've got to explain why people such as Barack Obama, Donald Trump all say that UFOs are real. They're in a position to have been briefed on this. You can look at the Admiral of the Fleet, Lord Hill Norton of the United Kingdom, former Minister of Defense Staff, has basically said UFOs are real. You can look at Haim Eshed, the father of the Israeli space program, that says non-human intelligence is real. You can look at Paul Hellyer, the former Minister of Defense for Canada, has said non-human intelligence is real. You can look at Chris Mellon, who's the first Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, for the Undersecretary for Intel and Security, has come out and said UFOs are real. You can look at David Grush, who just testified last year before the House Committee on Oversight to the effect that there is a government program looking at the UFOs because they're real. And he was accompanied by two naval aviators that said the same thing. You can look at Lou Elizondo, who's a very famous UAP whistleblower. So, and there's many more of these. So that's sort of like the testimonial evidence. In fact, you can look at the legislation that was just submitted by Senator Schumer and Senator Rounds, and as well as Senator Rubio and Senator Gillibrand and several other of their colleagues last year, that basically said we need to look into this. The Congress is not being told the truth, and there's evidence that the government knows more than what they're saying about this topic. In fact, Senator Rounds and Senator Schumer had a colloquy to discuss this very topic and intended to reintroduce that legislation. And so then you can look at the data. We've got videos, what they call colloquially the FLIR, the gimbal, the go fast video, that show unidentified flying objects that the Pentagon has asserted are not ours and are not our adversaries. And they date from events that happened in 2004 and 2015. You can look at the experience of Gordon Cooper, one of America's first Mercury 7 astronauts who chased UFOs in 1951 over West Germany, and had testified before the United Nations in 1979 to that fact. You can look at the incursions over the northern U.S. ballistic missile early warning system in the 70s, where radars were picking up UFOs. And then you can look at, in the 1960s, the readiness status change of our ICBMs at Malmstrom Air Force Base, where missiles were taken offline. And then in the Soviet Union, an analogous thing where missiles were brought online, and there are FOIA documents and testimony to the reality of that. There's an agreement between the former Soviet Union and the United States that's still in force, intending to reduce the threat of nuclear war, where there's a stipulation that either side will notify the other if UFOs impact their missile early warning systems. So people say, well, if this is real, why don't they just land on the White House lawn? Well, in 1952, the radar visual sightings over Washington, D.C. for 2 weekends, including air-to-air intercepts, that precipitated the largest press conference since World War II up to that time. And so people say, well, okay, why don't they just land in the middle of the day? And that's happened in 1994 in Ruwa, Zimbabwe, where craft landed and beings presented themselves to elementary school-age children in the middle of the day. That almost similar, identical incident happened in 1966 in Westall, Australia. There's a concerted correlation between UFO or UAP activity and nuclear sites. The Pantac site in Texas and the Hanford plutonium production facility have numerous UFO sightings and correlations. And in fact, this extends to overseas sites. Even the Fukushima incident had correlations. So looking at the evidence, both from the standpoint of first principles, from the standpoint of people who would know, and from factual information, it's indisputable that this is a real phenomenon.
Boom. That was such a good rant.
Yeah, he ranted on every little bit of evidence, or at least all of the eyewitness evidence.
It's a comprehensive argument, right?
Yeah.
Like being able to, including the first principles as well as the testimonials and the data, and it doesn't leave a lot of space for argument. Yeah. You have to construct a pretty elaborate skeptical denial to break down every piece of that, every aspect of that argument. And at some point, it just looks like you're dancing in circles because you want to maintain the worldview you want to maintain,
right? By
saying they're not real.
When a lot of times all you're doing is just saying it's impossible.
Right. It's impossible because I don't believe they exist. So because I don't believe they exist, they're impossible, and therefore they're impossible.
Yeah, and they don't exist.
So yeah, it's anyway, I thought that was a dope ass
that was really good
mic drop moment. All right, so then there's this entire interview he does with them, and obviously I've left the link to this video, so I recommend you listen to the whole thing, because basically half of this video is him and Karl Nell and Diana Pasulka on the stage of this event called Hereticon, and they're just having a dialogue back and forth, and both of them chime in. At one point, Diana gives her whole backstory, which I don't think we need right now, but
I don't think we need it right now. No.
But anyway, I'd like to skip forward to the second half of the podcast where after they get off stage, Jesse and Diana, they're in some sort of back room here where they're just having a one-on-one conversation and with just Jesse and Diana, and they go into some really interesting topics here. Okay. And so here's the next clip I wanted to go into.
Off camera before this, you were saying, you interpret Plato maybe slightly differently than a lot of kind of quote unquote philosophers or scholars.
That's right. Yeah. So of course I read Plato, early on as an undergraduate and again as a graduate student, but I really didn't start actually reading Plato until I encountered the people who believed in UFOs, and I saw the ways in which UFOs have been, concealed by our government. Within this environment where I witnessed harassment firsthand, saw people who were the quote unquote whistleblowers being harassed. And, it's not pretty. It's terrible. And I was depressed. So I thought, how do I make sense of this? And so Plato's Republic kept coming back into my head. And Plato, by the way, he asked the question, can there be a just society? And why he asks this is because he's pretty horrified by what happened to his mentor. His mentor was killed by his government, which was Athens. And Socrates was given an out, but he didn't take it. Instead, he said, I live by the laws of Athens and I'll die by them. And this is just, this is right. Well, Plato didn't buy that, it seems. He has a dialogue between Socrates and Glaucon, and they ask the question, can we have a just government? And they go through all these ridiculous scenarios. He's saying that, no, it doesn't look like we can figure out how to have a just government. How do we do it? Well, then he performs it. He does a performative thing at the end of the Republic. And so what does he give us? He gives us two things that we call allegories or metaphors. One is the allegory of the cave. People are, see shadows on the wall, and they think that and people are showing them these shadows, by the way. So we tend to discount that there are other people that are or things that are showing us these shadows, and we are thinking that they're reality. And somehow we get out and we ascend out of the cave and we recognize that, wow, most people are completely blinded by this. Okay. So how does this work then? And so then he throws in basically the first recorded, or one of the first recorded NDEs, which is the myth of which is about the soldier who dies in battle and has a near-death experience and sees that people actually, live again. They're immortal. They have some kind of soul. And so he tells this story. Well, those are two very strange ways to end this book about the just society. And so when I'd ask my professors, what does this mean? Because I went back to them, and I even asked my friends who are philosophers, so what do you think about this? It's just a metaphor. It's just an allegory. Well, I don't think it is. So what's then the takeaway? The takeaway is a performative thing. It's nothing that you can say, Jesse, do this and it'll be all right. No, you have to actually do it. What is it? Well, it's basically creating a community of people like the other person. So it's called a dialectic, and it's a mystical conversation, basically, which is really hard for us to wrap our brains around. What does it even mean to have a mystical conversation? I think that if people are watching this talk, they've had a mystical conversation, right? And you have too. Think of those times when you met that person who's like your best friend, and every time you saw them, the energy would change, and you'd have such an amazing talk. That's what he's talking about. That kind of community based on that. Because wouldn't you die for that person? Mm-hmm. Wouldn't you do those things that are noble before that friendship?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the kind of thing that he's giving us.
That's amazing. Well, yeah. And I think a lot of Plato readers think of him as fully allegorical, and they don't think there's some metaphysical architecture that he's actually talking about. Like the myth of I think, is a great example. So the cave is another example. But in the case of the myth of he's talking about this myth where you have anamnesis. You have this idea that there's this primordial soul self that kind of has knowledge of all of your incarnations. And then you cross the river of forgetfulness into, an incarnation where you forget your former self. and maybe through kind of a near-death experience or a mystery ritual, which, by the way, Plato, we probably now know, went through the Eleusinian mystery rituals himself.
That's right.
And so he probably believed this, like to all the people that think it's just an allegory, then you experience noesis. You
Yes.
regain knowledge of your kind of immortal soul. Do you think that literal reading of Plato is an important kind of overlay that
image is super cool, by the way.
Yeah, I like that.
Dang it, I lost it.
We'll post it for everybody to see while we're going through this, but
yeah,
that is a good image of what they were just talking about.
Yeah, so
the idea of like going through some sort of ritual or some sort of like a near-death experience that kind of allows your mind to be connected to past lives and or just knowledge or some sort of understanding, and that's where a lot of this paranormal stuff comes from, or psychological stuff like telepathy or reincarnation, or a lot of these things where you remember certain aspects of like traveling through the reincarnation cycle.
But to Diana's point, it's a very interesting way to end this dialogue about what is the just society, is to have this allegory of the cave, which is essentially like the ancient Greek version of the Matrix, right? Yeah. Like the ancient Greek version of this idea that like these people are sitting in this cave and their entire world, their entire life, they've been chained up in this cave, and all they've ever known, all they've ever seen are these shadows playing on the wall. And so they think that the entire world around them, the entire, like what existence is the way that these shadows move about and interact with each other. There's this entire shadow play happening, and then they somehow get unchained and they enter up out of the cave, and they realize that the world is much bigger, much fuller.
What if
but her point that like people, and I have noticed this as she pointed it out, I was like, oh my God, like you're so right. So many people who do mention the allegory of the cave and talk about it, they'll draw the similarities to things like the Matrix, and they'll say,
but they don't embody it.
But her point that they never really emphasize the idea that someone else is showing these people in the cave the shadows. There is someone that is putting on this play. This play is not just happening by the universe. Someone is putting on this play. And that's a pretty interesting aspect of the story, is that it's not just these people by the nature of the universe that are taking in this play. Yeah. Like someone has chained them to the wall and someone is showing them these shadow puppets.
What if the cave, the story of the cave itself, was the only allegory in the entire story, and after that it's no longer an allegory? So like the idea of we were trapped mentally in this cave because there was like the interpretation of like man's consciousness being trapped in the cave, and once we broke free of the cave, we stopped seeing things as illusions.
It just, like, what are the implications of that being at the end of a dialogue about what is a just society? It seems like the implication for that is that essentially if part of the conversation about what is a just society, the end of the conversation is talking about this idea of this grand illusion that is being like foisted over the population, then is he essentially commenting on the idea that the only way to have a just society is to have a society of people who have broken free of the cave?
Yeah, that's what I think. That's what would make sense to us.
Because how could you have a just society of people strapped to a wall watching shadow dances, right? Like
it's just it's unjust.
You can't build a just society of people who have this like wool over their eyes, but you could of these people who have had their their eyes open to the reality, you could, at that point, like with these people who are awake, these people who are engaging with ideas, like those people coming together, they can build a just society amongst themselves.
Yep.
And you know what else that makes me think of is Ayn Rand and her book, The Atlas Shrugged.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Have you ever read that book?
No, I haven't read the book, but I watched I watched Cloud Atlas. Isn't that part
totally
of it?
Different.
Oh,
totally different.
Okay, never mind.
Ayn Rand is this, she's a former Soviet Russian, she left the Soviet Union and came to America. She escaped. She's like a Soviet Jew, and she comes here, and she's this philosopher who's very much for freedom and very much for, she's actually the person who coins the term libertarian. She is one of the forefathers of the sort of like libertarian movement, and she writes this book called Atlas Shrugged, in which essentially there's this like crazy degradation of society, and all of these people who are so like these these super productive, creative, like industrialists and creators and artists and judges and these people who like are the backbone of like what makes society function, who are actually trying to make a just society, but society doesn't want to be just, and everyone is like fighting for this corruption, fighting for this like socialist world, and trying to like tear everyone else down, to tear down everyone else's achievements, so to spread the wealth amongst everyone else. She's very anti-socialist. That's a big like theme in her writings, obviously, as like a former escaped Soviet. And so in the book, these people, they end up leaving society. And from the perspective of society, all of these like wealthy industrialists just like disappear from the world.
Right.
And this person who runs this like train company, she ends up on this whole journey that leads her to this like hidden society where all these industrialists disappeared to, and they essentially like separated themselves from the world and built this like free enterprise, like essentially paradise between themselves, where like it's super high tech, and it's like Wakanda in the MCU. Like they've got this like projective dome that like hides them from the world, and they have their like super high tech, ultra just capitalist dream society in there. Anyway, it makes me think of that because towards like kind of what Diana's pointing at is that like what he's pointing at here is that it's only these people who are sort of awake to the illusions who can then come together and mutually understanding that they're all on the same page, build a just society amongst each other, because they're not infected by these people who are trying to tear everything down, who are stuck in the illusions of the cave.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I do think that there's a lot of different aspects of illusions that we are under too, that aren't just specifically to this topic either, you know,
and including the other story she points out, which is, you know, essentially like an NDE experience showing that there's reincarnation, there's a soul, and there's an afterlife, and then, you know, like having both of those sort of illusions broken. That is how we can create a just society, is by shattering those illusions for people and
opening all the information up to everybody.
But that takes effort, and it doesn't come on its own. Like
it won't come easily either.
You have to seek these things in order to open your mind to them. And only once there's enough people in society who can come together and mutually build society amongst themselves in a way that benefits everyone with the understanding of these truths, now we can start talking about building a just society. But
yep, that's when the libertarian idea comes through and takes hold.
Yeah. Anyway, I found that it doesn't have like a ton to do with UFOs, but like the fact that she's talking about like people who are into UFOs who brought these ideas,
right,
who are talking about this, I found that pretty interesting.
I agree.
Anyway, should we take a break? There's a couple more clips I want to show here.
Sure.
So, all right, I'm gonna try something new here. This is I've been showing like instrumental clips of my band for a long time. So this is me and my buddy M. Bourne. He's a rapper, and this is from our album. Where we call ourselves Soul Food, and this is from our album First Course. So I decided to do the whole thing with him rapping here.
Nice.
So this is our song called If I. So enjoy.
Yeah, I got a date with destiny, but I'm flirting with greatness. Between us, jealousy and hope trying to save us. In love with my dreams, so I sleep with her often. In search of peace and beats to get lost in it. Proceed with caution, this life could be rough. Be your enemy or best friend and switch back up. But I keep my eyes open and my heart on my sleeve. I wear it proudly, that's a part of my steez. And if you ever call, I'll be there in the breeze. Just tell me what it is and I'll give you what you need. And I'll come running just to see you again. If you ever need a friend, just know you can call on me. Now follow me along, don't be alarmed, don't hesitate. This world is ours, make no mistakes, but we don't gotta stay. I wonder would you care at all if I called your name? I know this game ain't fair, but I gotta play. I know it can be so hard, I know it can be so tough. Just cause we're over now don't mean we had enough. I don't wanna leave you, yeah. Oh, but I just can't stay. Would you come back to me? Yo, if I call I can hear all the voices in my head and the rhythm that it plays to the beating of my heart and the music that it makes. This position that I'm faced with, choices I must take, can either take me higher or lose you by mistake. It's the price I gotta pay for this life that I chase. From this mic and this page to the lights and the stage. And suffice it to say, I'm in love with my dreams. Do I choose it over love or fight for my queen? It's the life of a dreamer and I'm right in between. Whether right or it's wrong, got the right to be me. So tonight let's let it be and pretend I never leave you. Treat you as my equal, cause that's how I see you. I need you more so than ever, never before. Let's play it out, as we hit a chord. This instrumental, of course, you're the one. But these drums got me wondering who's still with me when the music stops playing. I know it can be so hard, I know it can be so tough. Just cause we're over now don't mean we had enough. I don't wanna leave you, yeah. Oh, but I just can't stay. Would you come back to me? Yo, if I called your name, would you feel the same if we switch position? This language that we speak is so strange, yet we play like this flame will never go out. It's my time more than ever, but I can't go now. I can't, but I must, and I'll take the blame for it. I'm lost in the love and I feel the pain for it. It's the same story again, and I'm sorry to say it's part of the game. This heartache and pains, but what's it worth to gain to lose you over the fame? Now would it be the same if I left and came back? Can we be again? I know it feels so cold, but just hold off for a minute. We got a long way to go, this is just the beginning. The pain is just too real without you here. Even though we're apart, you held me down from the start. I know you're always near, I know you're always here. You're holding down my heart. I know it can be so hard, I know it can be so tough. Just cause we're over now don't mean we had enough. I don't wanna leave you, oh, but I just can't stay. Would you come back to me if I called your name? If I called your name, if I called your name. Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed that.
Is that Derek on this one?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
Derek,
it's
right.
our buddy Derek singing. He's super cool. Actually, it's their whole band.
Yeah, that's
back
right.
when we had the studio, was
Yeah.
they used to call themselves
One
Thomas
Direction,
and Plecker.
right? I'm just kidding.
There's sort of like a cool, like jazzy band. They end up going into like different styles later on.
Yeah.
But yeah, we invited them in, had them like, play around with some musical ideas. And then we sampled what they came up with, and I sampled it, chopped it up, and I used the samples of that to lay out the verses. And then during the choruses, we just let them play natural and Derek sing. And yeah, I thought it
was that a song they had already had? Or
no, it just all just like improvised and come up that day. Like those guys are super cool.
Yeah,
super talented musicians. Anyway, I'll leave some links to their stuff because their stuff's awesome. Cool. All right, let's hop back into this. So this bit, they go into Christianity as a sort of continuation of like Greek paganism, and talk about, then they connect that to like modern UFOs and this idea of like what happens if the reality of UFOs and the reality that maybe like what if these things are actually taken as real?
Yeah. Like what does that mean? Okay.
Yeah. Like what would that do to people's worldviews? Even for people who already believe in religion, like it's one thing to believe, it's a different thing to actually know.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, here we go.
Are there examples of kind of connections between early Christianity and, I guess Martin Luther King, I think, wrote an essay about the pagan continuity hypothesis.
Yeah.
And so, there's this idea that even the Last Supper might have been kind of a mystery ritual of sorts. Elaine Pagels also writes about that.
That's right.
Yeah.
So we're learning, so a lot of people think that Christianity is set and it doesn't change, right? Well, archaeology is showing us, and material culture is showing us so many things that we are learning about the early Christians. And also, I would suggest that the Greek Orthodox Church really does actually know about this connection between Socrates and the Greeks, the Greek Socratic philosophers basically, and this lineage that goes directly into Christianity, early Christianity. It's a Hellenized Judaism. Right? So it's a Judaism that's completely infused with Greek thought. Like you look at the Apostle Paul, all of the scriptures of Christianity are written in Greek. Okay. So yes, this makes sense.
Wasn't Paul supposedly, according to some scholars, kind of a Kabbalist too? Like he was in the Merkabah kind of, Ezekiel tradition.
It looks like it. I mean, I'm not a New Testament scholar, so I don't want to go out on a limb and say for sure, that was. But
Disclaimer
yeah, if you look at his, his conversion, it looks similar to Merkabah. And I do have friends who are New Testament scholars, and they don't feel comfortable coming out and saying these things, but they'll tell me in secret. They'll say, yeah, Jesus too, by the way. Yeah. And I'm like, really? Why don't you write a book about that?
The book of Acts, he goes up on a cloud.
That's right. Yeah.
It's amazing how much some of these kind of esoteric religious practices actually comport. Like if you look at the Hekalot, the palaces of, Jewish Kabbalism or whatever, you have 7 of these palaces. Well, in Egypt, you had the Arit, the 7, and then, in Rosicrucianism, he goes up through 7 levels, and, he has to leave a garment behind on each level. At each level, you always encounter kind of, these different beings. Some are good, some are bad, but they sort of, are all testing you.
That's right.
So it's very fascinating.
So we're talking about this tradition, this Merkabah tradition that seemingly talks about a form of community, if not a government, a form of community, ecclesia, right? That's the early church Greek term for the community, right? That's based on these connections with Merkabah, seraphim, what have you, these kinds of knowledge bearers, messengers of God, right? And so how would that look today?
That's a great question. I don't know. How would it look today, Diana?
Well, I think that we're seeing it now. I think we're seeing the very beginnings of this type of recognition that they're,
with UFOs.
Yeah, that's what I think is going on.
Yeah.
And there's, this recognition that we're not alone. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I mean, that was the premise for a lot of those schools, was that we're not alone, but you have to get right with these things.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the whole idea was they were looking inward.
Yeah.
So they weren't looking outward. So the whole tradition, like of Paul, he changes his name because, think about his conversion. He was Saul, and he was living a life of violence of all things, right? He was very violent. Now, why he was violent, I don't know, but he was persecuting and wanting Christians to die. And then he has this Merkaba situation that he seemingly didn't cultivate. Right? It happened just spontaneously to him, it seems, at least from his position. He didn't call it into his life. And then it changes him. He changes his name. And then he works for these communities. He gives his life to the formation of these communities.
So how should an average person sort of conceptualize this stuff? Because, it seems like if you read like William James, there's kind of an outer ring of religious people that don't truly believe in the metaphysical kind of architecture underneath the religion. They just kind of show up to church or synagogue or a mosque and they kind of pray and they do the daily rituals. Maybe it's this Pascal's wager for them where it's this like hyper rational. If I do this thing, maybe there's an afterlife. And then you have these mystics that sort of go straight at the truth. But that seems kind of dangerous from like a, institutional power structure perspective. Like often these mystics are misinterpreted or clamped down on by human power structures. And then even in a more primordial sense or whatever, there's the parable of the 4 rabbis who all try to go up into the heavens and like, one goes mad, 2 die. And like, I might be botching this, but like one makes it, right? And so it's this like extremely straight and narrow, treacherous path.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it is.
So, like, why should anybody take that path?
No, I totally agree. I'm in agreement with that.
Yeah.
But when students do come through my classes, I teach basic, survey of religions, kind of thing. And when we were in the Christianity section, I'm in the South, so there were lots of Christians in my class. They go to church. And so I say, why do you go to church? And they don't know, right? And I say, what about this part of the Bible where, it's talking about this angel or that angel and, this and that. And they're like, well, that doesn't happen anymore, right? And so I think that so I try to get them to interrogate, their own religion. Like, what does it say? Why are you Christian? Or why are you Jewish? Like, why are you doing this? Is it just because this is the cultural tradition, your heritage? Because it could be, and that's fair enough. Okay.
Yeah.
But what I really liked about Karl Nell's talk at the SALT conference was that he basically did the same thing. And I thought it was really interesting, but he did the same thing of, well, you're talking to people who are religious, and all of a sudden they're confronted with the reality that what they think is this metaphysical thing is actually real. Well, that's going to be a shock for them.
Are you implying that perhaps we as a society may not be ready for disclosure?
I guess I would draw an analogy, though, for people believe in a certain faith tradition, whatever that faith tradition is, and hold to that and subscribe to that in a very serious and devout way, and sort of pose the question, even for folks of that ilk, and I would count myself as one, if you're confronted with the reality of your religious belief system, like the reality of the metaphysical, an angel, a messenger from God, what have you, that's going to be a sea state change in your way of dealing with reality, right? Even though you already believe it, right? So it's one thing to believe and it's another to know. And I think in this context, this phenomena has the potential for an analogous effect, both on the individual and on society.
And I was actually shocked that he said it. And I was like, wow, that's kind of what I say to students, but never so bluntly, like never like, no, this is a reality, because I can't really say that. Maybe it's a reality, maybe it's not a reality. But there's a whole tradition of it.
Yeah. Well,
that's a great point. Yeah. Going back to Karl Nell, that's the video we covered before previously,
right.
Of him. And I think that's absolutely true. Like, you could be a full believer in seeing something in it, and something so drastic to like the second, the coming of your religious figure, whoever it may be. And you just know now that everything that you were thinking was true, or you had believed in, is just reality.
Right.
That would be a shock to you, even if you fully believe. Yeah. So like us, like if we fully believe the UFOs are real and then all of a sudden they're just on our doorstep, we have to face the reality of what now we have to figure out what does that mean for our future now, knowing that they are absolutely 100% real.
And there's almost levels to that too, right? Yeah. Because like it's like they talk about like the close encounters of the first kind, second kind, third kind, right? So like it's one thing to talk about it and like believe, like be convinced by the evidence, by these 3 lines of evidence that Karl Nell talks about, right? And you're like, okay, well, I'm convinced.
Yeah.
But then it's another thing to actually see it and witness it.
And experience it, yeah.
And then it's another thing to like be brought on board
Involved
and abducted. And, like there's different levels to this thing. And, Diana in her work, and I believe in this video also, but at different points that I didn't necessarily demarcate, she talks about how, I lost my train of thought. She talks about how like these people in like Christian history, like these saints and stuff who have these experiences with angels, like this is not all hunky dory. Like this is not some cute little cherub, Cupid looking little baby angel with a cute butt.
Right.
That's like coming flying down to you with a cute voice being like, God wants to tell you this,
sweet nothings in your ear,
this is like terrifying shit and people come away with injuries and it's
traumatic.
It's traumatic experiences and it's not necessarily as easy to handle as some of the stories that get filtered through before we hear them. And she has this scholar who can go back to the original sources and read this stuff, and it's like native language from the exact, like the actual testimonial written by the saint itself right after it happened.
Right.
When she reads this stuff, it's like, and they describe it in their own words, like it really starts to sound a lot more like these modern UFO phenomena.
These abductions, these encounters.
Right. And and even if you're just like sort of a cursory, like if you have like even sort of absorbed some of these stories from Christianity, like, like what is this, like one of the main things these angels say when they encounter these people is one of the first things they always say, fear not, fear not. Well, that implies that they are in a state of fear, and that implies that there is something to fear.
Right. Right. There's a reason for the fear, and yeah, that's true. That's a good point. Fear not. We are here to be got. Whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So not only the reality, but maybe the uncomfortable truth about the reality.
All right.
And the fact that it's not all, cupcakes and roses. But
and it's not just like some, fully like, benevolent force coming down to ease your mind and,
Right,
like
right.
This might be a very drastic thing that might happen.
These are paradigm shattering, experiences.
Yeah.
And like, even like in the like Bashar videos we talk about, or we show, like he's sort of implying this same thing, which is that like he's showing himself in the form he's showing himself, like as this channeled entity, like even as weird as this like channeling and as unaccepted popularly as this like channeling mediumship is, it is a way of presenting to us where it's still a human being talking, and this is still within our worldview. Yeah. And now it's on us to just judge whether or not we believe it, right? And it gives them a chance to give a message without this sort of ontological shock, right?
Right. But for actual belief or for actual knowing, you would still need the event.
Like, it wouldn't be so comfortable if he was here in his own skin, in his own presentation, his own physical manifestation. It may not be, as easy to digest, right? And even when he says like as these like occurrences are going to start happening, he's talking about this like sort of hybrid race that's going to be the first ones to come, because it's easier for us to accept these beings that are sort of half or partially human, in that they'll look different, but not so different. You know,
like so a reptile.
They'll be the first like ambassadors of this change
transition.
Which goes to show how crazy if they were to just come down in their own form, how that might play out. Anyway, I found the whole thing pretty interesting. And also, I did not know before that Martin Luther King wrote a book about this pagan continuity, or a paper about this pagan continuity hypothesis. I think we should look that up and cover it on the podcast. That'd be cool.
Yeah, we should look it up for our next one. And
this idea of like pagan continuity into Christianity is super fascinating. And I think, back in the day when I was a Catholic, and, like it would have blown my mind. And I remember first, encountering this idea with Brian Murarescu's work. A lot of people don't understand just how much Christianity seems to have absorbed all of these pagan rituals and pagan iconography and adapted the polytheism of paganism and maybe reassigned and recategorized to fit into this like monotheistic Christian mold. So instead of these like, multiple gods, maybe you have these like angels and these classes of angels and demons,
the abilities
and, like
of
lower
these former
spiritual
gods.
Entities, right? Rather than these like pantheons of gods, right?
You have one god, but you have all these other, characters with other abilities that you would have ascribed to other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I find that also fascinating. Anyway, here's the last bit, and we're running over, but let's check this last bit out. This is talking about who Diana calls in her books Tyler Durden, right? But we know now through like internet sleuthery that this person is this guy named Timothy Taylor, who was a NASA flight controller. And they talk about, so Jesse Michels has this whole series on Thomas Townsend Brown. And when we talked about the Cosmic Summit talks, one of the guys we covered was covering Townsend Brown's anti-gravitics work. Mm-hmm. So there's this really interesting tie together between this Timothy Taylor and Townsend Brown and that they talk about in this clip. And I find it super fascinating. So let's check this out.
Yeah, it was really, really cool.
That's incredible. The other interesting connection with Tyler is he met Chris Bledsoe, I think, or before
That's
you.
right. Yes, he did. Yeah.
And they had a relationship, and I think Ryan Bledsoe, who's Chris's son, said that Tyler had told Chris that he was part of a group with Townsend Brown, who I just mentioned. So Townsend Brown's this like fascinating mid-century inventor who I think, made more discoveries in the world of gravity than meet the eye, might have tied gravity and electromagnetism together. And that has implications for time as well, because if you can shift gravity at all, you can shift time and general relativity. Yeah. And he would talk in his private life constantly about time travel. And so what I found just so fascinating is Tyler tells the Bledsoes that he was involved with a group that was based in Nassau and the Bahamas. And Townsend Brown was the president of this group, and time travel technology was involved. And I would totally discount that and think that's probably wrong if I didn't know so much about Townsend Brown. And I know he spent a ton of time in Nassau in the Bahamas, and with a very interesting kind of cast of characters.
Well, that's so fascinating, because when I knew Tyler, he was always talking about time travel. And
really?
Yeah, whenever a new movie about time travel would come out, he would go see it.
Like the Adjustment Bureau.
Yeah, he loved it. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So I mean, wow.
Yeah, what a cool little. That's cool that she has personal ties to somebody who. Yeah, wow.
So man. We've got a Townsend Brown expert and someone who spent tons of time with this, Tyler Tim Taylor character.
Tyler Durden. We'll call him Tyler
Who
Durden.
spent a bunch of time with Chris Bledsoe, and like the connections here are pretty. This is some crazy stuff, man.
Starting to really connect from all the different points. You know, you got the religious kind of, historical, biblical scholars kind of coming at it from one direction. You got the
and then you got Chris Bledsoe who sees it all through biblical and Christian eyes.
Exactly. And it has a completely, more pagan kind of experience.
Right, with the entities. With Hathor.
So he has more of a pagan experience but with his Christian lens, and then connection to the modern UFOs and historical UFOs,
and so you got this guy Townsend Brown who's obsessed with gravitics and obsessed with time travel, and then you got this Tyler who's obsessed with time travel and who's a NASA mission controller and is super into UFOs and is contacting Chris Bledsoe and testing him with like objects that he says are from Roswell and that like Chris is reacting to. Like,
it's all coming full circle, man.
Super fascinating stuff, man. Super fascinating.
Just gotta wait for that first time travel model from GE to come out.
It's just really crazy, man. Like the more you dig into this UFO topic, like the deeper it goes, and
and the kind of further back it goes, like in time, and then you connect it to all these other historical things that have gone on, and you put different lens on the way you look at the past,
right?
And then it starts to open up some of the differences in our real past and what maybe we actually have to discover in our past, and science, or like in the entirety of just academia over the millennia, just suppressing any information on the truth of the matter, on what we're actually discovering and putting the connections together.
Well, it's almost like only the people who've escaped the cave get to investigate these things. But as far as if you're still in the cave,
you can't just want to escape the cave. You have to actually escape it.
The shadow puppets on the wall will tell you the story that these things aren't real. You got to escape the bondage, and you got to get outside of the cave in order to start like seeing the stories and the connections.
You have
and
the connection to the actual information.
But even still, like, there's so many like intriguing and interesting connections, and it's hard to know where it's all going. But it seems like there's a there.
It's got to be a there for us to get to.
Yeah.
Anyway, appreciate y'all hanging out with us on episode 34. 35?
54.
Or 54. Yeah, 54. So if you guys find this topic and any of the little, rabbit holes that we have opened up, let us know. Shoot us an email. Shoot us a fake, funny AI email if you feel like it. That was fun.
You can email us at host@dualitycheck.net.
Visit our website at dualitycheck.net, and it's got everything, all the links, all the videos,
full show notes episodes with all the links to anything we refer to on
if
the
you don't want to
episodes.
support any of these other platforms, go to our website and just support us there. And, listen to everything.
If you want to check everything on video format, we got YouTube and Rumble. It would really help us out if you gave us a like and a subscribe over there and engage with us in the comments. It'll help other people know where we're at, and maybe one day the algorithm will take notice of us and start suggesting us to people.
Us more.
So help us out there if you can.
Anyway, thanks a lot. We'll see y'all next week. Later.
Adios.